We're going to start in 4 minutes, but I figure if there's any questions or anything before we get started about last week or in general, or I don't know, we can just chat before we get started, and then people who come in will think they came in late and they'll feel bad.
Let me say just one thing before Rabbi starts. We have tweaked the sound system. We've got speakers right on top of it, so we should be able to hear this week. And we've got a sound man up there. If we can't hear, he's going to crank it up. He's going to help us.
And explain again how they get the booklet.
Okay, this is the booklet. It's 48 pages. It's on the Christ Church Cathedral website. Look here. Somebody printed it in color. That's really
It was office. I didn't do it.
okay. Go to ChristCathedral.org and scroll down on the main page until you see that man's face on the poster.
Wanted.
To the poster. Is that right?
Yep. At the very bottom of the poster, there's a link.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work the first time, click it again. Because the first time it took me to something different, and then I was like, did I get that wrong? I clicked it again, and it worked. So.
Yeah, the idea is I'm only covering what we have time to cover, and there's so much more in there. I figured you could get the booklet and you could look at it if you're interested in what we didn't cover.
And if for some reason you don't have the means to print 48 pages, see me. I'll print you a copy. Okay?
What a nice guy.
Give us 25% more volume. John? Yeah. 25% more volume. Copy.
Okay, so now... So are there any questions from last time? Anybody here this time that wasn't here last time? Okay, two people. So let me do it all over. So, quick review from last time. Judaism is different from Christianity. Okay, so now you're all caught up. What we did last week was we laid out the foundation. Judaism is a literary religion. It's all about writing. It's all about books. It's all about interpreting the Bible. It's all about arguing over these things. And then the core teaching is from Hillel, who's a generation ahead of Jesus. And Hillel said the entire Torah, 5 books of Moses, but he really meant the entirety of Judaism, is summed up in his version of the Golden Rule. What is hateful to you, don't do to anybody else. Jesus comes a generation later and puts it in the positive. And then he said everything else, all the holidays, all the rabbinic traditions, everything else, he said, is commentary. And commentary is a way of deepening your understanding of the primary text, which is the Golden Rule. So his understanding of Judaism, and that's the way we're approaching it here, is that everything in Judaism is linked to the teaching, what's hateful to you, don't do to anybody else. So that's why it's called one-foot Judaism, because the story in which the teaching of the Golden Rule is couched is the story of the Roman soldier who says to Hillel, teach me the entire Torah while I stand on 1 foot, and then he comes up with that one-liner. Last week we explored the Golden Rule. This week we're going to look at how we explored his teaching of the Golden Rule. This week we're going to look at the commentary in the form of certain practices. But again, before we do that, comments, questions? No? Everybody all set? Okay. It dawned on me that we're actually in the middle of the holiday season in Judaism. The New Year was 10 plus days ago, and then that was Rosh Hashanah. Then 10 days after Rosh Hashanah comes Yom Kippur, the Day of Repentance, or the Day of Atonement. And then a couple of days after that comes Sukkot. So we're in the end times of Sukkot, the last hours of Sukkot. Sukkot is the Hebrew word for booths. And the holiday is a harvest holiday. And the way you observe the holiday is you build these booths in your backyard, and you're supposed to live in them for 7 days. which you can do if you live in a decent climate. But if it's hot and muggy and buggy and it's awful. But some people still do that. We would build it and then look at it and go back in where it's air conditioned. But you build these huts. Originally the huts were a storage unit during the harvest. So you'd harvest all day, you bring the stuff into the hut, and the workers would sleep in the hut during the week of harvest. So it's Jewish Thanksgiving, basically. And the primary rituals are two besides building the hut. One is, and I meant to bring it, or I had it, but my car broke, and I ended up taking my wife's car, and everything that I had in the car for this is in the car in the shop. But it's, you have this long palm frond and a citrus fruit and these other pieces of myrtle and different things that you hold in your hand, and you shake them in the 6 directions, north, south, east, and west, up and down, as a way of thanking God for the harvest. But the real work of the holiday is study. Every Jewish holiday has study attached to it. And the study for the holiday of Sukkot is the book of Ecclesiastes. And I thought we would take a look at Ecclesiastes as a way of understanding the Jewish psyche. So that's the first thing we're going to do today. Then, starting tomorrow, is the last holiday of the fall holiday season, which is called Simchat Torah, rejoicing in the Torah. Jews read the Torah on an annual cycle. Every week there's another portion that you read. And if you read it completely each week, you complete the entire 5 books of Moses over the course of a year. So this, what's today, Wednesday, Thursday. So this weekend, we will finish reading the end of Deuteronomy. And on Simchat Torah, you read the last part of Deuteronomy, but you don't wait to the next week to start over. As soon as you finish Deuteronomy, you immediately start with Genesis. So there's no break. So we're going to do that. We're going to do the second part of that. We're just going to look at Genesis because it fits with Ecclesiastes. While the two holidays, Sukkot and Simchat Torah, have no connection whatsoever other than chronological, they have an absolute connection philosophically. And together, they give you, I think, real insight into the Jewish philosophical understanding of the nature of reality and how best to live it. Does that make sense, what we're going to do? Okay, let's see if we actually do it. Sound okay? Because there's a lot of feedback from these things, because I'm in front of them, but I think we're all right. Okay, so I was telling Father Richard that one of the differences between a synagogue and a church is that in a synagogue you can always find a Bible. Whereas in a church it's really hard. My Bible is in my car's in the shop. I got here and said, what's the big what's the problem? I'll go in, and there's got to be a library, but there's no library. In a synagogue, you sit in the pews, and every person, you've got hymnals. I guess these are hymnals, right?
Prayer books.
And prayer books. We don't have either. Oh, no, we have prayer books, but we also have copies of the Bible. So I thought, stupidly, there would be Bibles somewhere.
Did you need a Bible?
No, I have a Bible because one of you stole a Gideon Bible from a Marriott. And it was in a little storage area. They're there for the taking, and so we have one here. But in Judaism, it's all about text. So we have to read the text. And I'll read it to you, and you know the text. Most likely you know it by heart. Anyway, we're just going to look at a couple of verses. So you study in the sukkah, the booth, the book of Ecclesiastes. Let me lay out the physical setting for you. The booth has to be fragile. It doesn't have four sides. It cannot be a permanent dwelling, and it has to be open to the elements. If it rains, you get wet. Right? There's no shelter in the booth. Right? There's no place to avoid whatever nature's going to do to you in the booth. Now, if it's raining in the booth, people go inside. But the idea is the booth itself does not protect you from the elements. That's important when you start to look at the book of Ecclesiastes. When you think of the opening line of Ecclesiastes, besides the notion, the words of the preacher, that's what Ecclesiastes may mean. This is, again, the King James. Ecclesiastes is Greek. It probably means either the assembler, because, we think people say King Solomon wrote this book. Probably not. But it's an assemblage, an anthology of different teachings. So the person who put it together is called Ecclesiastes, the assembler of this material. But a better word is probably teacher. But this Bible says preacher, but whatever it says. So the first verse is, the words of the preacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. So the assumption is that King Solomon wrote this. And we're not going to argue that. We'll just go with the conceit of the book. But it's the second verse that matters most. So anyone know how the philosophy begins after we get it Solomon's book? What's the first thing Solomon says? Vanity of vanity. Yeah, vanity of vanity, everything is vanity. Or meaninglessness upon meaninglessness, everything is meaningless. Or suckiness upon suckiness, everything sucks. That's the Message Bible, maybe. It's really negative. Right? This one says vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities. All is vanity.
This one says meaningless.
Meaningless.
Meaningless says the teacher, utterly meaningless.
Yeah, utterly meaningless. Purposelessness upon purposeless. It's whatever your favorite negative word is, the book Ecclesiastes starts out saying, everything sucks. There's no point to this whatsoever. And before I tell you that's not, what it really says, and then it just goes on. I'm just going to read it without fixing the sexism. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes. Everyone, you get birth and then you die and you can't win. Everything is just meaningless. It's just a waste. And happy holiday, by the way, right? I mean, that makes no sense. Why are you doing that if that's what it says? Luckily, that's not what it says. The Hebrew, I don't know if you can read my writing. You could before Father erased it, but and that's an L, not an H. Yeah, it's Havel Havalim. Let me see if I can fix that. So he says in Hebrew, Havel Havalim, and then he says, Hakol Havel. Everything, Hakol, everything is Havel, which my Bible says is vanity, your Bible says is meaningless, Hakol Havel. But Havel doesn't mean either of those things. Havel comes from the word like dew, like morning dew. What he's saying is everything is like morning dew. It's there when you get up, but by 10 o'clock in the morning, it's gone. It's evaporated. Ephemeral. Ephemerality, if that's a word, upon ephemerality. Intransience upon intransience. Impermanence upon impermanence is a much better translation. And I've written 2 translations of Ecclesiastes. Everything is impermanent. Nothing lasts. That's what he's saying. Hakol Havel. Everything is fluid. Nothing is permanent. If you accept that as the starting point of the book, The book is not making a value judgment about life. It's simply telling you the reality of how life operates. It's not steady state. It's not fixed. Everything is in flux. And the book from that point on is about, so how do you live with that? So right after he tells you everything is in flux, everything is impermanent, then he says, what do you gain by all your toil which you toil under the sun? If everything's impermanent, there is no ultimate gain. So maybe you shouldn't live as if there were. Maybe if you're trying to win in a world where there's no winning, maybe that's not the best way to live your life. He says the sun rises, the sun goes down, it hastens to the place where it rises. They thought, the world was flat and the sun went and popped up somewhere else. The wind blows to the south and it goes around to the north. What's the point? It just keeps blowing. All he's saying is everything is constantly moving. Well, we know that's true. That is how the universe is structured. That's how life is. That's how nature is on the earth. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. Thank goodness. Right? If we lived in Miami, we would say, oh my goodness, it's getting fuller and fuller because the tides are rising, because the glaciers are melting. But just imagine if the seas did fill up. That would be bad. But they don't. How do you live? This is the implied question. How do you live in a world that isn't fixed? That's the question of the book. You're sitting in the sukkah, open to the elements. Maybe you had a good harvest. Maybe you had a bad harvest. And you're reading Ecclesiastes that's telling you, good or bad, it's not fixed. If it was a good harvest next year, you don't know. If it was a bad harvest, maybe it'll be different next year. You don't know. You can't be certain of anything. There is no certainty. There is no surety, except the fact that there is no certainty and there is no surety. The only thing you can be certain of is that you can't be certain of anything. The only thing you can be certain of is that everything's in flux. And then, if we have any Birds fans, the band, not the animal, right? He goes to chapter 3, and then he says, for everything there's a season and a time for every matter under heaven. So you can translate that as season, or you can translate that as time, or you can translate that as moment. So in a fluid universe, there's a moment, he says, for everything. Every possibility will come around eventually. And then he gives you a list of the ones he's thinking of. There's going to be birth and there's going to be death. There's going to be planting and there's going to be harvesting. There's going to be killing and there's going to be healing and there's going to be, entropy. Things are going to fall down. And then there's going to be time to build things up and there's going to be time for crying and laughing and mourning and dancing. And he goes on with all the different options, all the different opposites. That's how life is structured. That's just the way it is. And then he ends that. That's chapter 3, verses 1 to 8. And then in verse 9 he says, what gain has the worker from his toil? None, if you're struggling to fix one of those opposites and hold on to it. If it's crying time, and you're trying to hold on to laughing time, you're miserable. If it's crying time and you're trying to hold on to crying time and you're moving into laughing time, you're also miserable. If you cling to any specific moment in a world that is totally havel, hakol havel, it's all fluid, if you cling in a fluid world, you're just making yourself miserable, or what he calls chasing after the wind, which means a vexation of the spirit. You drive yourself nuts because you can't win. Nothing is permanent. Nothing is permanent. I once had this guy come to see me when I was a rabbi in a congregation. He came to see me and he was very upset. His dad had died. In the Jewish tradition, when a parent dies, kids too, but just talk about parents. When a parent dies, you have 1 week of intense mourning. So if you're really Orthodox, you cover the mirrors of your house, so you never look at your reflection, so you never go, oh, I look terrible, I should clean up. You don't worry about what you look like. You're just mourning. Don't worry about yourself. You don't sit on furniture. You sit on a little box on the floor. So you just mourn, and so you sit uncomfortably. You don't cook, you don't do anything like that. The community comes and takes care of you. So people come in all day, they bring you food, and they can hang around. The custom is the mourner says nothing. Take that back. The visitor says nothing unless the mourner initiates a conversation. So you don't go in and say, I'm really sorry that this happened to you. How you doing? If the other person says, thank you for coming, then you can have whatever conversation you want to have. But if the mourner doesn't feel like talking, don't initiate a conversation. So people come in and out. They leave you food. Maybe you talk. Maybe you don't talk. But for 7 days, it's this intense, my life has been disrupted, and I'm just in mourning. When that's over, you've got 30 days to slowly move out into the world. And you can do whatever you want to do. Or you can not do whatever other people want you to do. So if you have a job, this is, your company does what it does. But theoretically, if you have a job, your company gives you a week of intense mourning, and then 30 days, come to work, don't come to work, whatever you feel like doing. But at the end of a month, you're back to normal. And the way you signal that you're back to normal is you're supposed to take a walk around your neighborhood. Now, this is when people lived close together, and they're all, neighbors were friends. And so you went for a walk, and people said, you're back. So this guy came to see me. The week of mourning was over, and he was being, maybe hounded is too strong a word, but he was being hounded by friends to get out of the house. Go to a movie, come on, we'll just go. We won't see anything depressing. We'll see a comedy. We'll go and watch a funny movie, just break your mood. So eventually they wore him down, and he said he'd go. So I don't know what the movie was, but they went to a movie, and the movie was funny. And he's sitting in the movie theater, and something funny happens on the screen, and he laughs. And then he says, oh my God, what kind of son am I? My dad just died, and now I'm in the movies, and I'm laughing, and I'm actually having a good time. I'm an awful son. I should be mourning. And so then he gets sad. And he's sitting in the movie theater, but now he's depressed. And then something happens funny on the screen, and then he laughs again. And he goes, oh no, I'm laughing again. I gotta be sad. So he made himself sad. And that's how the whole movie goes for him. And then he felt guilty, so then he came to see me, which is always a bad idea. Because I'm not a trained counselor, and I don't have a lot of patience, and I'm always writing a book. But anyway, so my rule of thumb is, what do you need? I have no idea. Bye. But that's my counseling technique. Hopefully you do better. But he comes in, and he wants to talk about this. And I said, I'm an Ecclesiastes guy. So I said, look, there's a time for weeping and a time for laughing. And so you were weeping, and then you went to a movie, and you laughed, and then you were weeping again, and then you laughed, and then you were weeping again. Welcome to reality. Hakol havel, that's the way it goes. Don't feel bad. That's just the way reality is. That's how it works. And that could happen for months or years. Who knows? That's just the way it works. You're making yourself miserable because you're assuming you should be one thing rather than all the things, which is what Ecclesiastes says, eventually you hit them all. The trick that, I don't know, the trick's the right word, the key to living in a world of fluidity, a world of havel, of impermanence, is not to cling to one of these things, but to know what time it is. Is it laughing time? Then laugh. Is it crying time? Then cry. Anyone want to sing? I do know the song. I know it's crying time again or something. So, yeah, there you go. But you're too embarrassed to sing it loud. But okay. So you have to know what time it is. That's what Ecclesiastes says. And when you know what time it is, he says, you end up living a very simple life. So his whole philosophy of living is, we always make it what? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you will die. That's not what he says. But he does say something similar. He says, eat simply, drink moderately. They didn't have water. Water was not clean, so they drank wine. That's why Jesus turns water into wine, because if you drank the water, you'd probably die. So they would drink moderately. He says you should wear clean clothes, you should find work that brings you joy, and you should have 2 or 3 friends. And then he makes this weird statement. I don't know where it is exactly. I have to look it up. But he says you should have 2 or 3 friends. And then he makes this odd statement saying that they should warm you at night. So you don't know what he's talking about. You're intimate with these friends, or you don't know where he's going with that. But it's friendship and work and simple living. And knowing what time it is, that's the key to living in a world that's radically fluid. Holding on, making things, whether it's good or bad, making whatever the moment is, stick, is only going to vex the spirit. It's like chasing after wind. It doesn't work. And so once a year, you sit in a booth, open to the elements, with the bounty, hopefully it's a good bounty, of the earth all around you, because it's a Thanksgiving harvest holiday. And then you sit with your family or your friends, and you realize, or you remind yourself by reading Ecclesiastes, that you don't know what tomorrow is. You got now. Tomorrow may be the same, it may be different, you have no idea, but you have now. And what you need are the friends that you're sitting with, and as simple a life as you can manage, because anything else is just going to be needless trouble. So that's part of the mindset that Ecclesiastes introduces into the Jewish psyche. So let me stop for a second and see if questions about that, if I made that clear. I mean, we read this every year, and only I understand it. But we read it every year. Yeah.
About when was Ecclesiastes compiled?
About 2,500 years ago, something like that.
Would the compiler have been aware of Greek philosophical?
Yeah, great question, right? So does he know the Stoics? Does he know Heraclitus? Does he know the Buddha? So there's a big debate, not in Jewish circles, just in historical circles. If you look at Proverbs, the last proverb in the book of Proverbs about the woman of valor, she runs an international, what do you call it when you import-export? The Bible says, this is their ideal woman. She runs this international import-export business, and she brings in stuff from all over the world. Now, their world was the Middle East. So she would have been aware, and this is all the same time period, she would have been aware of the philosophical influences from the Greeks and maybe from India. So there's a strong argument to be made that books like this were written under the influence of Hellenistic traditions, Greek traditions, and bear the stamp of Greek culture. So yeah. But I would say also Buddhist culture. I mean, Buddhism is based on the notion of impermanence. Right? Anicca. Buddha said the same thing. So did the Buddha get it from Ecclesiastes? Did Ecclesiastes get it from the Buddha? Or do all awakened people discover the same thing? Which is more what I think. But yeah, there's definitely cross-fertilization going on there. Thank you for raising that. Anybody else? Yeah.
The holiday, how long do you sit?
Each day? Usually it's dinner. Yeah. Yeah, so, well, like my sister went to, it's like dinner, yeah, supper time. My sister went for lunch. Because people have, you might go to like my sister's rabbi's wife invites her women friends over for lunch into their sukkah. But it's a meal. It's not like they live, but again, some people live in it for a week. But
They order sukkahs. Like my husband got a call from a friend who's trying to put together a sukkah for somebody, and my husband's he's a carpenter, and the guy just could not figure out the angles.
oh yeah, you can get them on Amazon.
Yeah.
You can buy a kit on Amazon if you can figure out how to put it together. Yeah.
And the top has to be like greenery.
The top has to be
Like an
thatch,
Yeah.
like so you can see the stars and stuff through it. Yeah. There's a whole theory that Palm Sunday, which I don't know when it is this year.
Week before Easter.
No, yeah. But when is that? Is that April or March? It's in April. There's a whole theory that Palm Sunday was actually part of Sukkot, because that's, Sukkot is when you have the palm fronds, and they're waving them on Sunday when Jesus comes into Jerusalem. Well, this is a whole week of palm frond waving. So there's a theory that Jesus actually came to Jerusalem during the holiday of Sukkot, which would have been beginning of spring. So not Passover. I mean, the beginning of fall, not spring, for Passover. But
The living simply, is that, are they opposed to wealth like Christianity is, basically?
no, as Jesus is. Yeah, Jesus, sell all you have and follow me. But, Christianity is not opposed to wealth. No, Judaism isn't. Yeah, Judaism isn't
Well, how do
opposed
you
to it.
reconcile living simply with,
Yeah, so the way you reconcile the fate of the rich man with Christianity. People who have wealth go, they didn't mean me. That's how you reconcile it. Yeah, religion does whatever you can afford to have religion do. So that's how you get away with it. But, Ecclesiastes, if you read the book, he says, which is one of the reasons why it's so interesting, he claims to be King Solomon. And he says, look, I've got more money than God, though he doesn't put it that way. And I have the biggest houses, and I've got the best gardens, and I've got 900 wives, and I'm telling you, none of it is any good. I don't get any pleasure from any of it. So other people will go, well, let me find out for myself, buddy. But okay, so he's very, very rich, and he's telling you. But then you could argue, yeah, of course, the rich guy is always telling you to be happy with nothing because I'm going to keep my riches. So you can be very jaded with all of this stuff. But Judaism isn't opposed to wealth, but it mandates 10% of your annual income be given to the welfare of the poor. Somebody just emailed me for my article in Spirituality Health magazine, and this just happened to me over at the bookstore at Vanderbilt. He says, I'm very spiritual, but I am sick and tired of being bullied into giving charity by ads on TV where I see these desperate kids and puppies. And when I go to the cashier and the cashier says, would you like to donate to breast cancer awareness, or today I gave $1 to girls running? I said, where are they running? So I gave the cashier over at Vanderbilt, I gave her the $1. I felt bad because there were 3 people in front of me and they all said no. And I said, well, I don't know. So I gave her the $1 and she put it in the cash register. And I said, wait a minute. How do I know that $1 is not going to the store and is going to the women's running club? And she said, I don't know. And I said, well, so she said, okay, I won't put it in the cash register until you leave. So this guy emailed me and said, I'm really tired of this. So I said, well, the problem is that charity is based on the Latin word caritas, which comes from the heart. And so the idea behind charity is I have to be emotionally moved before I give. So I have to see elephants up close with a wide-angle lens, because everybody in a wide-angle lens looks really depressed. So you see a puppy with a wide-angle lens, or an elephant, or a baby, and the more flies on the baby, the better, and you feel really bad about it, and then you give them $19.99 a month, and they give you a T-shirt. And that's how it works. They pull your heartstrings. And then you're in the cashier line, and then, you give $1 to whatever, and they're all probably good causes, unless, like at Vanderbilt, they took my $1 in the cash register. But you're standing there, and some stranger says, will you give $1? And you go, no, I'm Scrooge, I'm not doing it. And other people in line are like, oh, that guy really is a Scrooge. So you feel guilted into it. But in Judaism, what in English you might call charity is called tzedakah. It comes from the word tzedek, justice. Or in Islam, it's called zakat. Same idea. It's an obligation. You can feel good about it or bad about it. It makes no difference. If you're a Jew, you're obligated as a Jew to give 10% of your annual income to the welfare of whomever. And you got to work it out. So my wife and I make a list of where the money should go, and then we figure out our income, and then we divvy it up and we send it off. So we don't feel like we have to give, except my $1. We don't have to give because we gave. Or in zakat, in Islam, you give 2.5% of your wealth, which is much more intense than your annual income. And it's the same thing. You're obligated. If you're a Muslim, this is what you do. If you're a Jew, this is what you do. And it's never, I never get an email or a flyer or something from a Jewish organization saying, look, feel bad about this. Because it's not. It's, consider adding us to your tzedakah list. We need your help. Maybe you didn't know about us. Here's what we do. And consider giving to us. But they never pull at your heartstrings. It's a very different kind of thing. I don't know what made me think of that. What was the question that triggered that? I don't remember. Yeah.
Sort of related to giving. So
Except to the church. Everyone should give to the church. Everyone.
So in Nashville, we have a temple here in Nashville. We've also got synagogues. What's the difference between the temple in Bellmead and the Western Synagogue?
Yeah, the difference between temple and synagogue is political. So synagogue is the Greek word for, meeting, gathering place. And when they first created synagogues thousands of years ago, they used the Greek term for gathering, and that was the term. When Reform Judaism started in the 1800s in Germany, they wanted to make a statement that unlike the orthodoxy against which they were arguing, orthodoxy prays 3 times a day to restore the temple in Jerusalem and sacrifice. We're going to restore the sacrifice. And still Jews pray that. Orthodox Jews pray that. Maybe conservative Jews still pray that. And there are movements in Judaism to go to the Al-Aqsa compound on the Temple Mount and knock down the mosque and throw out the Palestinians and rebuild the temple because they believe God loves barbecue. Even though the prophets in the Hebrew Bible, God says, I hate the stink of your sacrifices. The rabbis, said, we're not about building the temple, we're about having synagogues, but still they prayed for the temple, and Orthodox people still pray for the temple. The Reform movement said, we don't want anything to do with the temple in that old form. So they said, let's call our gathering place temples. And that will make a political statement that we, as Vice President Harris would say, we're not going back. We are the temple. When Jews came to America and the Reform movement came to America from Germany, they said, why didn't you build the freeway through the church? They said, when they came to America, they said, America is our Zion, not the Holy Land, not the Promised Land. They were not going back. They had no interest in Zionism until after World War II and the Holocaust. So the difference between a synagogue and a temple is a temple is a reform thing. Though I think it gets blurry, because isn't the conservative synagogue in town called the West End Temple?
No, it's called West End Synagogue.
It is? Okay, then I'm wrong. Sometimes they blur the names.
But the temple has a Jewish name as well.
Yeah, but it's whatever it is. But it's not, it's congregation something. Yeah. So sometimes they'll call themselves congregation. But usually only conservative and Orthodox are called synagogues, and Reform is called a temple. I grew up in synagogue. I never called the synagogue that I had, we never called it a temple, because I didn't grow up Reform.
But Micah's known as Micah.
Yeah, right, but it's temple Micah, or is it congregation Micah? Congregation Micah. Yeah, but the history of temple and synagogue is that.
So, Rabbi, in Episcopal churches, traditionally, like October, November, we start something called a pledge drive. And it's sort of based on St. Paul's words of, he mentions tithing, the 10% rule. So if Jewish, devout Jews pledge 10% to just taking care of the poor, do they also pledge a certain amount for the upkeep or the continuing work of the temple or synagogue, and how do they pay the clergy and all that sort of thing?
Grudgingly. That's how they pay the clergy.
This is a great concern to me.
Of course. So let me tell you how it works. Synagogues are very different than a church. Synagogues are dues-paying operations. So they also have pledges because they never charge as much as it costs to run the building and everything else. Rabbis get paid, I don't know what you get paid, and I don't want you to tell me, but rabbis get paid commensurate with PhD professors at a local university. So when I started out, that meant about $100,000. Probably, of course, it depends where you live. So here, I don't actually know what rabbis get paid here, but my daughter-in-law works at a university. She's on tenure track. She gets like $70,000. So maybe rabbis are getting 70, maybe 100, maybe even more. But rabbis make serious money, and they charge the membership. I mean, it's not cheap to belong to a synagogue, and the money, and it's not just so you pay for the salary of the rabbi, and then you have to pay more if you have kids in the school, and then you have to pay more if your kid is going to become a bar or bat mitzvah. And if you have a kid in the preschool, that costs more. And then there's going to be a fundraising drive because you got to do the refurbishing of the building like you guys are doing. It's a constant money spending, making, Money, what is it?
Money train?
Money train, yeah. It's a financially, it's really a challenge.
So you're saying you can visit for a while, but after you can like come into the synagogue and all, so I pull you aside and say, hey pal, it's time it's time to pay your dues or something?
Not if you're just going to pray. No, prayer is free. But if you want to become, part of the community, that's expected that you join. Yeah.
I've known some Jews here in town that belong to at least two congregations.
Oh yeah. If you can afford it, a lot of Jews. I mean, it's expensive to be Jewish if you're really involved. There's the Jewish Community Center. That can cost you, I don't know, I'm not a member, but $1,000, $1,200. Synagogue can cost you $1,200 or more. Federation, which is the communal organization, they want money, and they give money to Israel, and they give money to help social things around Nashville. It's an expensive operation, which is why lots of young Jewish families go, I can't afford it. So then synagogues will say, well, we won't charge young families. And then the older families go, geez, now I got to keep up for all these other people. So it's financially, it's a real challenge.
And do they charge for and give tickets for the high holidays?
No. They give tickets, but they don't charge. Or they don't give tickets either. I mean, I don't know, each place does it differently. When I had a synagogue, members got tickets. So we knew who was coming. But they didn't. If you weren't a member, we asked for a donation. But members, again, nobody got, if you were a member, you weren't charged extra for coming to high holidays. But if you weren't a member, yeah, we hoped you would give a donation. But it's just very difficult to keep the money flowing.
So you kind of touched on a little bit of like membership and belonging to the specific community. And I guess my question is can you explain a little bit more about the theological and like what we would call sacramental nature of like membership and formation of youth and young adults? So for like us, it's baptism in infancy and confirmation at an older age.
Yeah, when you're 8 years old, they cut your penis. That's a biggie, if you happen to have a penis. So, then the next time they're interested in you is when you become bar or bat mitzvah. That's like formation. Reform has then confirmation. That happens maybe when you're 16. I don't know what spiritual formation is exactly. Judaism isn't, it's more of a community thing, it's more of a cultural thing than it is a spiritual thing, which is problematic because people are looking for the spiritual and the rabbis aren't prepared for that. Now, this is just my opinion, but there's nothing that happens like communion, where you have that moment of oneness with Christ. There's nothing like that in the synagogue service. You don't have a clergy person who's empowered to do something that a lay person can't do. You don't need a rabbi for anything in Jewish ritual. Lay people can. No, lay people can do everything.
Well, most Christian churches are Catholics and Episcopalian, but most Christian churches are not aware of any special power a priest has.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so maybe it's like that too. But they have, I have no idea. Well, he said Catholic and Episcopalian. Yeah, we don't have any of those things. The only thing a rabbi is trained to do, but it's not, even that's not exclusive, is to teach the Bible. I mean, that's what I went to, or the law, or the traditions. If you have an Orthodox rabbi can make legal rulings, if you have an issue that falls into that category. What's kosher? What isn't kosher? Can I do this? Can I not do that? If it's something you need a rabbi to rule on, then you go to your rabbi. Reform rabbis are almost never asked any question like that. Reform rabbis focus on teaching Torah. I mean, that's what I went to school for. That's what I wanted to do. I remember once a woman came up to me and said, "Rabbi, your sermons are always about the Bible. Don't you have anything else you want to talk about?" I said, "No, that's why I went to school. 5 years I learned about the Bible. And that was postgraduate school. I like the Bible." Which brings me back to the next thing I want to talk about before we run out of time. So, Sukkot ends today. We're finishing up the book of Ecclesiastes. The idea is life is fluid. How do you live with this fluidity? Tomorrow, we have a day of assembly, which everyone just gathers again, and then we start Simchat Torah tomorrow night. If I got my days right, maybe it's Friday night. I have to look in the calendar, but it's coming up. And Simchat Torah is the celebration. Simchat means rejoicing, in the reading of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. And again, we read the last part of Deuteronomy. Moses dies, and then we immediately flip, that's the wrong term, I'll share that in a minute, to the opening Genesis. So we don't flip. There's no book. There's scrolls. So if you go to a synagogue, there's a wall on the eastern wall where all the scrolls are, and there's one scroll that's rolled, because otherwise you'll be there all night, that's rolled to Deuteronomy, and they pull it off the ark, and they open it up, and they read the end of Deuteronomy, and they roll that one up, and then they pull another scroll that's already primed for the beginning of Genesis, and they open Genesis, and they read that one. On the heels of Ecclesiastes, Hevel Havalim Hakol Havel. Everything is fluid. What's the beginning of Genesis? In the beginning, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, that's verse 1. And the earth was formless. What have you got? Oh, you're not looking. You're just remembering. Formless or
Void and darkness.
void and formless?
Darkness covered the.
Well, that's the next line. But before that, it says formless and void or something. What have I got here in my stolen Gideon? It says the earth was without form and void. Without form and void. The Hebrew is, if you can read my writing, which you would have if Father Richard had not erased it. That's a U. Tohu vavohu. That's not a V, it's a U. Tohu vavohu. Bible says formless, what does it say? I just read it.
Formless and empty is the way.
Without form and void and without form and void. And what did yours say? Empty. Tohu vavohu in Hebrew means wild and chaotic, incapable of holding form, which is the same as Havel. It's fluid, it's wild. Genesis and Ecclesiastes are separated by centuries, maybe a millennia, I don't know. But they're not written at the same time. But they make the same point. When God creates the universe, or earth, however you want to read it, when God creates the world that you and I live in the beginning, it was wild and chaotic and without form. If you read Greek myths or other creation stories, they all start out in that kind of crazy way. But the God who's doing the creating somehow defeats the dragon of chaos or whatever, and then out of the chaos creates order. But chaos is killed, but not in the Torah. Order comes next. You know, there was light and darkness, day 1, and all the rest of it through the 6 days of creation. There is order. But the chaos, the tohu vavohu, is always underneath. It's always present. So it's this wild, shifting, crazy thing, and then there's a veneer of order that's placed over it. And the tohu vavohu breaks through all the time, which is what gives you the sense of instability, transience, impermanence. You can't rely on steady state. Genesis says that. Then later, centuries later, Ecclesiastes reaffirms it. There's something in the psyche of these Hebrew authors, and they're not the only authors, so different people have different views. But these two authors, and there's a whole theory that Ecclesiastes was a guy, but there's a whole theory that the early Genesis was written by women. You like that? Yeah, there's he's deceased now, but his name is Harold Bloom, who said that he's a literary scholar, wrote interesting books on the Bible. He says a lot of the early Genesis material was written by women, which is why the men in the early stories, like Adam and the other guys in the story, they're all sort of doofuses. And his argument is that these women were writing stories for one another, and they're making fun of the men they knew. And then these stories become Bible stories, and then everything goes wrong. But philosophically, which is my point, the author of Genesis 1, verse 2, has the same insight as Ecclesiastes 1, verse 2, that life is wild and uncontrollable. And that all God does is put a veneer on it. And then, later on, just to make things more interesting, Isaiah 45:7, the prophet Isaiah has this vision of God where God says to Isaiah, I create light and dark, good and evil. Then he uses the ineffable name of God, which means the verb being. The happening one, or the being of all being, I do all these things. I am the chaos. I am the wildness. I am the weeping and the laughing and the whole thing that Ecclesiastes goes through. I am the happening of all these things. If you love me, you have to get all of this. And so in Job, chapter 2, verse 10, Job says to his wife, who in verse 9 says, curse God and die like a man, because she's ticked off that her children were killed. Job says, don't be foolish. We have to accept the good and the bad from God, because it all comes from God, according to Isaiah. So there's this substratum, or there's this stream of philosophical insight in the Bible, not just the Torah now, but in the Bible, Ecclesiastes, Job, Isaiah, as well as Genesis. There's this philosophical stream that says God is everything that's happening. We talked about that last week. God is everything that's happening, and the world that you and I experience is this wild, fluid place of the divine. Happening is all possibility, and the only way to live in that place is to be present to and accepting of whatever's happening in the moment, knowing that it's going to change in the next moment. Can you find tranquility in the madness? That's the challenge of Sukkot, and then it's reinforced with rejoicing in Simchas Torah. And if you flip it and you back it up, and then we'll take some questions and I'll let you go. Before you get to Genesis 1, verse 2, you get the death of Moses. Moses wants to get to the promised land, and God says, no, you can't go. So here's this guy who was 80 when he meets God at the burning bush. He's 120 when he dies. He spent 40 years of his life struggling to get the people to this promised land, and then God says, see it? Okay, you're dead. And then he kills him. He dies. And no one even knows where he's buried. So he gets no credit. He says, we can't go to his burial place. You can't put flowers on his grave. Well, we don't do that anyway, but you can't, pray there. You can't do anything. We don't even know where he is. And he doesn't get to reap the fruits of his 40 years of effort. Because it's not about reaping fruits. Because everything is crazy and chaotic. It's just doing the best you can with what you got in the midst of the chaos. That's all you're given from that Jewish point of view. Now there's other Jewish points of view, but they're all wrong. So, but from that point of view, that's what you get. Wildness and the capacity to live with it in a way that is meaningful to you, but not ultimately satisfying, because there's no ultimate. There's just this moment and that moment and then this moment and the next moment and the moment after that. Can you live with that fluidity? So I'm going to leave you with that question and then see if you have others.
In one interpretation, though, that while 1:2 talks about the chaos, that the subsequent verses talk about the stability that was created.
Yeah, that's what I said. That's the veneer of order over the chaos. But God never gets rid of the tohu vavohu.
How do you know that didn't?
Because it doesn't tell us it did. I'm only going by what it says. Right? Because what it says is, the earth was without form and void, darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. And is that someone's phone? And then it says, call the light day, and the darkness he called night, and it just goes on from there. It never says God got rid of the tohu vavohu. It just says there's this wildness, and then there's light and dark and sea and dry land. The chaos is underneath the whole thing.
But he says that it is good.
Now then he says it's good. So you can read the good in two ways. Either it's good that there's chaos underneath, because that could be the creativity. So if we were scientists, then we're talking about the quantum indeterminacy, the indeterminacy of the quantum reality. It's good because if there were no chaos, then life would just run down and we'd all be dead. You need the chaos to create new possibility, new life, right? So that may be one reason it's good. Another reason it's good, which works along the same way, is that we're not talking about moral good. We're talking about engineering good. It's sound, it's right. This is the way you set it up. There's nothing morally good about light and dark or dry land and ocean. So the rabbis say he's not talking about right and wrong good, good and evil. He's talking about this is sound. This is the right way to set up a universe. Yeah.
So in that story, Genesis 1, it says something to the effect of the Spirit hovering over the face of the deep waters. Ruach, is that the word?
Yeah,
That's a feminine noun in Hebrew?
Yeah. Yeah, cut that out. Ruach Elohim, yes, feminine. And then it says hovered. So what is the hovering? So one, I would say a better translation is, I can't even say it. Ululating? Yeah, what, right? Can anyone do that? That sound? Yeah, like that. It's not just hovered, it's a sound. And there's this whole theory among, you follow what I'm saying? That it's not that God hovered, like it's just hanging out. It's the Spirit of God, which means the breath. The breath of God, which is feminine, the breath of God is making that sound. Yeah, like that. Yeah, so it's making this sound, And then there's this theory in many traditions that the universe arises out of out of the vibration, which for us is sound. And in Hinduism, that fundamental sound is Om. In John 1:1, it's the Word, right? So in the beginning was the Word. So the Word, now you can interpret it different ways in Christianity, but there's a whole mystical teaching that says in the beginning was the Word was God, and meaning the Word was the sound of the Spirit, which was this vibration. God is this wild vibration that out of which the whole universe comes. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to play with the energy notion, the vibration notion, the sound notion. And in 1 Kings 19, someone could check that for me. 1 Kings 19, is that where Elijah hears the still small voice? You know what I'm talking about? I may have could be 2 Kings, but anyway, I think it's 1 Kings, but you could look it up and correct me. But in that story, Elijah looks into the earthquake and the tornado and all these things, and God is not in any of those things. And then he hears what the Hebrew says is kol damama daka, this fragile voice. And there's, in the mystical tradition, it says this fragile voice is the sound of the Holy Spirit vibrating from, through all eternity. And my Hindu friends say, oh, that's Om. And my Christian mystics friends say, oh, that's the Word. And I have these Buddhist friends who say that you can actually hear it. If you do this meditation, there's nothing fancy about the meditation. It's just being alone and being silent. And if you just listen, you'll hear this, it's like a humming sound. It's like the humming sound. When I was in my sophomore year of college, no, wrong. Maybe. I think that's when it happened. I was in Israel, one of my trips to Israel. I went out into the desert and I left my tour behind it. I went out into the Sinai by myself when you could do that. And I was meditating on this dune, and Sinai is deathly quiet. And I'm just sitting, I made a little cushion out of dirt, out of sand, and I'm just sitting there because I'd been a meditator for a long time by then. And I'm just sitting and I'm meditating, and I heard this sound. And I couldn't figure it out. It was this pervaded everything. And then later, I talked to a Sufi guy, a Hindu mystic about it, a Muslim mystic about it, and talked to a Buddhist guy about it. And they said, no, what you heard was what the Bible calls the ululation of the divine, or in the Sufi tradition, it's the name Allah, Allah, Allah. That's how they think it sounds like. I just heard humming. But the universe has this sound. Some scientist I know says it's the red shift, but I don't know. But there's this actual sound that the human ear can pick up. And in the beginning, that was the Word, and that's the sound. So there's all kinds of interest, if you're interested in mystical stuff, there's all kinds of things that are going on in that one verse that connect to Elijah, that connect to Sufi, Hindu, and Buddhist mysticism. There's so much more to these traditions than we get in the normative teaching of them.
It's 1 Kings 19:12.
I was right, 1 Kings 19.
But at least in the New International Version, it's called a gentle whisper.
A gentle whisper. That's nice. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you. So next week, what we're going to do is talk about this rabbi named Abaye. He lived in the 4th century, and he taught about the ultimate way that you are to live morally in the world, based on awakening to the Holy Spirit. So we're going to take a look at what he has to say. It's the ideal, what's the ideal Jew? And then he tells you what it is, but he goes beyond that. It's the ideal human. So anyway, I hope this is interesting. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.
Community Across the Veil sponsored this series. That's a group here at Francisco, Shapiro, that ministry. Community Across the Veil is dedicated to reconciliation. If you want to know more about that, become part of that, you can Community Across Francisco. So thank you for coming. Same time next week.
And remember, fathers should be making 150,000.
Yeah.